Hi, welcome to ConflictStory, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
The sound of diesel engines at dawn isn't something you expect to wake up to in a quiet lakeside neighborhood. But there I was, Samuel Hartwell, 60 years old and supposedly retired, staring out my bedroom window at what looked like a construction invasion. 3 massive trucks had somehow materialized on my property overnight, their yellow hulks blocking my view of the lake I'd called home for 15 years. Workers in orange vests were already unloading equipment, and standing in the middle of it all, like some kind of battlefield, General was Karen Mitchell, the Homeowner Association's newest power-hungry president. I grabbed my robe and stumbled outside, my engineer's mind immediately calculating the weight distribution of those trucks on my carefully maintained lawn. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, but my voice got lost in the mechanical roar. Karen spotted me and marched over, her clipboard clutched like a weapon and her perfectly styled blonde hair somehow immune to the morning humidity. She was flanked by 2 men I didn't recognize, one in an expensive suit despite the early hour, the other looking like hired muscle in casual clothes. "Good morning, Samuel." Karen's voice had that saccharine quality that made my skin crawl. "I hope you don't mind us getting an early start on the Lakeside Fresh Fish Market project. According to our newly approved Community Enhancement Plan, this area has been designated for temporary commercial use to benefit all residents." She thrust a thick folder at me, pages fluttering in the breeze created by the machinery. "It's all perfectly legal, as you can see in Section 12 of the Emergency Community Development Clause." I flipped through pages of legal jargon, my hands shaking not from age but from rage. Half the text was highlighted in yellow, drawing attention to phrases like temporary requisition for community benefit and landowner cooperation expected. The other half might as well have been written in ancient Greek. "This is insane, Karen. This is my property. I never agreed to any of this." But even as I said it, I could see neighbors gathering at their windows, some with phones out, probably filming what they thought was going to be good entertainment. "Oh, but you did agree," Karen smiled, and there was something genuinely unsettling about the expression. "Remember the community meeting 3 months ago? The one where we voted on emergency powers for infrastructure development? You signed the attendance sheet, which according to our legal counsel, constitutes agreement to all measures discussed. I remembered that meeting, all right. I'd gone to complain about the streetlight they'd installed too close to my bedroom window. I'd signed in, stayed for 10 minutes of bureaucratic nonsense, and left when they started arguing about pool hours at the community center." The suited man stepped forward, extending a manicured hand. "Robert Kelly, Community Development Consultant. We're really excited about this project, Mr. Hartwell. Fresh Fish Market, right here where people can literally catch, clean, and purchase their dinner. It's going to bring significant value to the neighborhood." His handshake was firm but cold, the kind that businessmen practice to intimidate. Behind him, workers were already setting up what looked like market stalls, their aluminum frames glinting in the strengthening sunlight. "You're setting up a fish market on my lawn," I said slowly, trying to process the surreal nature of the situation. "Without asking me, without compensating me, and you think this is legal?" My voice was getting louder, and I could see more neighbors emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Peterson from 2 houses down was recording everything on her phone, probably for her social media followers who love drama. "Temporary requisition, as I mentioned," Karen repeated, her tone patient as if she were explaining something to a child. "The community voted Samuel, democracy in action. And really, when you think about it, this is going to be wonderful for everyone. Fresh fish, community gathering space, economic opportunity. You should be proud to contribute to the greater good." She gestured toward the lake, where workers were already beginning to set up what appeared to be cleaning stations along my private dock. That's when I noticed the teenagers, 3 or 4 kids from the neighborhood, including the Henderson boy who'd egged my mailbox last Halloween, were taking turns posing for selfies next to my garden shed. One of them had climbed onto my old workbench and was making exaggerated fishing poses while another filmed. "Hey!" I called out, but they just laughed and continued their impromptu photo shoot. The Henderson kid even had the audacity to wave at me before jumping down and running toward the lake. Boys will be boys, Karen chuckled. They're just excited about the new community space. You know, Samuel, you have a choice here. You can embrace this positive change and be part of something bigger than yourself. Or you can be the neighborhood grump who stands in the way of progress. Which version of yourself do you want to be remembered as? Her words hit harder than they should have. Since Margaret died 3 years ago, I'd become increasingly isolated, and I knew the neighbors saw me as the cranky old man who yelled at kids for cutting across his lawn. The memories came flooding back unbidden. Margaret and I choosing this house specifically for its lakefront privacy. Sunday mornings on the dock, her reading mystery novels while I tinkered with small inventions in my workshop. The plans we'd made for retirement, the quiet life we'd envisioned. All of it was being literally bulldozed by strangers who spoke about community benefit while destroying everything I held dear. But I'm not the kind of man who goes down without a fight. 40 years as an engineer teaches you that every problem has a solution. You just have to find the right approach. I need to see every piece of documentation you have, I said firmly. Every permit, every legal approval, every signature. If you're going to destroy my property in the name of the greater good, then you're going to prove to me that you have the legal right to do it. Karen's smile faltered slightly. Samuel, I really don't think that's necessary. We've done all our due diligence, I assure you. But Robert Kelly placed a hand on her arm and nodded. Of course, Mr. Hartwell. Transparency is important in community projects. Karen, why don't you get Mr. Hartwell copies of everything from the office? We want him to feel completely comfortable with the process. As Karen walked toward what I now realized was a mobile office trailer that had been set up near my mailbox, I watched the controlled chaos of the market construction, professional setup, expensive equipment, and a level of organization that suggested serious money behind the operation. This wasn't some half-baked community project. Someone was making real profit from turning my peaceful lakefront into a commercial enterprise. You know, Robert said conversationally, I've been in community development for 20 years, and I've learned that the most successful projects are the ones where everyone feels like they're winning. What would it take to make you feel like a winner in this situation, Samuel? There was something calculating in his tone, like he was interviewing me for a job I didn't want. I looked at him carefully. Expensive watch, tailored clothes, and the kind of confident posture that comes from never having to worry about money. What I want is my property back and my peace and quiet restored. But I'm guessing that's not the kind of winning you had in mind. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're right about that. But I bet we can find some middle ground. Maybe a small percentage of the daily proceeds, an honorary position on the market committee. These things can be negotiated. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about community development or fresh fish or any of the nonsense Karen had been spouting. This was about money, pure and simple. Someone had identified my lakefront property as a profit opportunity and had found a legal way to seize it without paying for it. The Homeowner Association was just the weapon they were using to make it happen. Here we go, Karen announced, returning with a stack of papers thick enough to choke a horse. Every form, every approval, every signature, all completely above board and legally binding. She handed me the documents with the same flourish she might use to present a birthday gift. Take all the time you need to review them, Samuel. We'll just continue with the setup while you do your reading. I retreated to my porch, the sound of construction growing louder as more workers arrived. The papers were a maze of legal terminology and cross-references, clearly designed to be incomprehensible to anyone without a law degree. But engineers are good at finding patterns, and the more I read, the more obvious it became that this was all smoke and mirrors. References to meetings I'd never attended, votes on measures I'd never heard of, and community benefits that somehow required the seizure of private property. The breaking point came when I found the survey map. According to the documents, the market was being constructed not just on my lawn, but on a strip of land that extended into the lake itself. Land that, according to my original deed, I owned to the water's edge. They weren't just stealing my lawn, they were claiming ownership of part of the lake bottom itself. I looked up to see workers installing large umbrellas over picnic tables that definitely hadn't been there when I'd started reading. Families were already beginning to arrive, parents carrying lawn chairs and coolers, kids running around with fishing poles. It looked like a community celebration, and I was the unwelcome party crasher at my own property. My hands were shaking again as I reached for my phone. Time to call the one person I knew who could make sense of legal documents and community politics. Martha Klein had been the Homeowner Association treasurer for 8 years before Karen's coup had pushed her out. If anyone would know what was really happening here, it would be Martha. Martha picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert despite the early hour. "Sam, what's wrong? You sound like someone's setting your house on fire." I could hear the concern in her voice, and it reminded me why I'd always respected her practical approach to neighborhood politics. Martha had resigned from the Homeowner Association board 6 months ago after what she'd called irreconcilable differences with the new leadership direction, which everyone knew meant she couldn't stand Karen's power-grabbing tactics. "They're not setting my house on fire, Martha. They're setting up a fish market on my front lawn." I explained the situation while watching a group of workers install a large banner that read, "Lakeside Fresh Catch, Community Market Grand Opening." The banner was professional quality, the kind that cost serious money, and suggested this had been planned for months. "Tell me you know something about this emergency development clause nonsense." Martha was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost hear her mental gears turning. "Sam, I need you to look for a specific document. It should be titled something like Community Enhancement Emergency Powers Resolution. If it's in that stack, the date on it will tell us everything we need to know." I shuffled through the papers, finding the document buried about halfway through. The date made my blood run cold. "March 15th, I read aloud. 2 weeks after I resigned, Martha said grimly, "Sam, that resolution was passed in a closed emergency session. No community notification, no public comment period, no real oversight. Karen called it after claiming there was an urgent need to respond to community development opportunities. I heard rumors about it, but I had no idea she was planning something this big." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Sam, I think you're being robbed in broad daylight." The confirmation of what I'd already suspected hit me like a physical blow. I sank into my porch chair, watching strangers set up shop on property I'd been paying taxes on for 15 years. What are my options, Martha? Can I fight this legally? But even as I asked, I could see Robert Kelly talking animatedly on his phone, gesturing toward my house. Whatever he was discussing, it didn't look like good news for me. "Legal action takes time and money, and they know that," Martha replied. "But Sam, there's something else you need to know. I've been doing some digging since I left the board, and Karen's been meeting regularly with out-of-town investors. People with money who see our lakefront community as an untapped gold mine. This fish market might just be the beginning." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture I didn't like at all. I ended the call with Martha promising to bring over some documents from her time as treasurer, evidence that might help expose what was really happening. But as I looked out at the growing crowd of neighbors treating my property like a public park, I realized that evidence might not be enough. These people weren't just stealing my land. They were stealing my identity as a respected member of this community. The Henderson boy and his friends had found my old fishing nets in the shed and were dragging them toward the lake, laughing and shouting like they'd discovered buried treasure. "Hey," I called out, getting to my feet. "Those don't belong to you." But my protest was drowned out by the sound of more vehicles arriving, including a local news van with Channel 7's logo prominently displayed. Karen appeared at my side as if summoned by my distress. "Isn't this wonderful, Samuel? The whole community coming together to celebrate our new market. And look, we even have media coverage. This is going to put our neighborhood on the map." She was practically glowing with satisfaction, clearly seeing this as her personal triumph. "You should be proud to be hosting such an important community event." "Hosting?" The word came out as a croak. "Karen, this is my property. These people are trespassing and you know it." But she just smiled that infuriating smile, and patted my arm like I was a confused child. Now, Samuel, we've been through all this. The community has spoken, and the community has decided that this space serves everyone better as a market than as your private garden. Democracy in action. That's when I saw her, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and tired eyes, standing apart from the celebration with a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She was watching the proceedings with the kind of professional detachment that screamed journalist, and when our eyes met, she started walking toward me. Mr. Hartwell, I'm Jessica Warren from the County Herald. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about today's market opening. Karen immediately inserted herself between us, her public relations smile switching on like a spotlight. Jessica, how wonderful that you're here to cover this exciting community development story. As president of the Homeowner Association, I'd be happy to give you all the background you need. But Jessica's attention remained focused on me, and I could see something in her expression that looked like skepticism. Actually, I'd like to hear Mr. Hartwell's perspective, since this is taking place on his property, Jessica said diplomatically. Sir, how do you feel about your land being used for this community market? The question was simple, but the way she asked it suggested she already suspected something was wrong. Karen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, I considered playing it safe, giving some diplomatic answer about community cooperation and supporting local business. But then I looked out at my destroyed lawn, at the strangers treating my dock like their personal fishing platform, at the teenagers using my garden tools like playground equipment. I feel like I'm being robbed, I said clearly. This is my private property, and I never gave permission for any of this. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Karen's face went through several rapid color changes, settling on an alarming shade of red. Samuel, please don't embarrass yourself with this kind of talk. We have all the proper documentation, all the legal approvals. You're making a scene over nothing. But Jessica was already taking notes, her pen moving rapidly across her pad. Could I see some of that documentation? Jessica asked Karen politely. For the story, of course. Our readers always appreciate transparency in community development projects. Karen's smile became strained. Well, certainly, but it's all very technical. Legal language and zoning regulations. I'm not sure it would be interesting to your average reader. That's when Martha appeared, carrying a banker's box and looking like she meant business. Samuel, I brought those financial records I mentioned, the ones showing how Homeowner Association funds have been spent over the past 6 months. She set the box down on my porch steps and gave Karen a look that could have frozen the lake solid. Hello, Karen. Lovely market you've got here. Very expensive-looking setup for a community volunteer project. I could see the calculation happening behind Karen's eyes. Martha represented everything she feared most, someone with inside knowledge and no reason to stay quiet about it. Martha, how nice to see you. I thought you'd moved on from community involvement. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Oh, I have moved on, Martha replied sweetly. Moved on to asking questions about where our association dues have been going. Funny thing about being treasurer for 8 years. You develop a real appreciation for financial transparency. She opened the box and pulled out a thick folder. Samuel, you might be interested to know that the association spent $43,000 on community development consulting in the past 3 months, all payments to Robert Kelly's firm. The number hit me like a slap. $43,000 of neighborhood money spent on what was essentially the seizure of my property. I looked around at the professional setup, the expensive equipment, the coordinated marketing effort, and suddenly understood the scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about my land. This was about transforming our entire neighborhood into something profitable for people who didn't even live here. Jessica was writing furiously now, asking Martha rapid-fire questions about association and finances and decision-making processes. Karen kept trying to interrupt, insisting that everything was completely above board and properly voted on, but her protests sounded increasingly desperate. Robert Kelly had noticed the conversation and was heading our way, his expression grim. Ladies, gentlemen, he said smoothly, I hope we're not letting a few administrative details overshadow this wonderful community achievement. Mr. Hartwell, I think you'll find that once the market is established, the increased property values in the neighborhood will more than compensate for any temporary inconvenience. His tone was reasonable, but there was something threatening underneath it. Temporary? I laughed, and it came out bitter. Robert, you've destroyed my lawn, commandeered my dock, and turned my quiet neighborhood into a commercial district. What exactly is temporary about that? The crowd was starting to notice our confrontation, conversations quieting as people turned to watch the drama unfold. The market operates on a seasonal basis, Robert explained patiently. Spring through fall, then everything gets taken down for winter storage. Very minimal impact and significant community benefit. It's really a win-win situation when you look at the bigger picture. But I could see Martha shaking her head, her expression saying she knew something Robert didn't want discussed. "Show him the lease agreement, Martha," I said quietly. "The one you found in the files." Martha smiled grimly and pulled out another document. "This is interesting reading, Sam. It's a 5-year renewable lease agreement between the Homeowner Association and Kelly Development Corporation. Guess what property is specifically mentioned as the primary market location?" Robert's professional composure cracked slightly. "That's just a planning document. Nothing finalized, nothing binding. We always prepare for multiple scenarios in community development." But Jessica had moved closer, clearly interested in this new development. "Mr. Kelly, are you saying your company has a financial interest in this market project?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just getting started. Around us, neighbors continued to enjoy their community celebration, unaware that their association dues had funded what amounted to a corporate land grab. Children played on my lawn while their parents bought overpriced fish from vendors who were probably getting a cut of profits that should never have existed in the first place. I stood up, feeling something crystallize in my chest. For 3 years since Margaret's death, I'd been drifting, going through the motions of retirement without real purpose. But standing there watching strangers profit from the theft of my property, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Absolute clarity about what needed to be done. They thought they were dealing with a grief-stricken old man who would roll over and accept their community development nonsense. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the vendors had packed up their overpriced fish, I sat in my workshop with Martha, surrounded by boxes of association records and financial documents. The space felt different now, charged with purpose in a way it hadn't been since Margaret died. My old engineering drafting table was covered with papers, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was working on something that mattered. "Hey, Sam, look at this," Martha said, holding up a contract. "They're not just planning to use your property. According to this infrastructure development plan, they want to expand the market to include the Patterson lot next door, and eventually the whole lakefront block. Your land is just the beginning." The scope of their ambition was breathtaking in its audacity. They weren't stealing one property. They were systematically planning to commercialize our entire neighborhood. I studied the engineering specifications they had included in their planning documents. Permanent electrical hookups, sewage connections, concrete foundations disguised as temporary installations. These people weren't planning a seasonal fish market. They were building the infrastructure for a permanent commercial development, and they were using association funds and legal loopholes to do it without paying market price for the land. "Martha, I need you to help me understand something," I said, pulling out the original survey maps of my property. "When I bought this house, I specifically paid extra for water rights extending to the middle of the lake, but according to their market layout, they're claiming that water belongs to the community." I spread the maps on the table, comparing property lines with the market construction plans. Martha leaned over the documents, her treasurer's eye catching details I'd missed. "Sam, they're not just claiming your water rights. Look at this drainage plan. They're redirecting the natural water flow from your property to create what they're calling a community water feature. They're literally stealing your lake access and calling it an improvement." The engineering in me admired the audacity, even as it made me furious. The next morning, I implemented phase 1 of what I'd started thinking of as the Hartwell Restoration Project. 40 years of engineering problem solving had taught me that the most elegant solutions often come from understanding systems that others take for granted. Karen and Robert thought they understood the system: legal paperwork, community pressure, and financial leverage. But they'd overlooked something crucial about small-town infrastructure. I started with the water supply. The market's fish cleaning stations required significant water pressure, which they were getting by connecting to the main line that ran directly under my property. It's amazing how many things can go wrong with underground water systems, especially when they're installed hastily by contractors who don't understand local soil conditions. A few strategic adjustments to pressure valves I'd installed years ago as part of my own irrigation system, and suddenly the market's water supply became intermittent at best. "Mr. Hartwell!" Robert Kelly appeared at my door around noon, his usual smooth demeanor showing cracks. "We seem to be having some technical difficulties with the market water supply. I don't suppose you know anything about local infrastructure quirks." His tone was still polite, but there was an edge underneath that suggested he was beginning to suspect I wasn't the passive victim he'd assumed. "Infrastructure is tricky around here," I agreed helpfully. "Old pipes, variable pressure, soil subsidence issues. I've been dealing with water problems on this property for 15 years. It's why I installed my own pressure regulation system." I gestured toward the visible parts of my irrigation setup. Of course, when you add unexpected demand to an aging system, things can get unpredictable. The beauty of engineering solutions is their deniability. Water pressure fluctuations were a common problem in our neighborhood, something everyone complained about regularly. When the market's fish cleaning stations produced nothing but a trickle during peak customer hours, it looked like bad luck rather than sabotage. But I was just getting started. Phase 2 involved the electrical supply. The market's elaborate lighting and refrigeration systems drew substantial power, which they were accessing through a temporary connection to the transformer that served my property and 3 neighboring houses. Transformers are delicate things, sensitive to power fluctuations and prone to protective shutdowns when they detect irregular loads. A few carefully timed high-demand activities in my workshop, running my welding equipment and old machinery simultaneously, created power spikes that triggered the transformer's safety protocols. "This is becoming a pattern," Martha observed, watching from my kitchen window as frustrated vendors dealt with their 3rd power outage of the day. "How long do you think it'll take them to figure out what's happening?" She was grinning, clearly enjoying the show as much as I was. "They're thinking like businessmen, not engineers," I replied. "They see problems, not systems, and they're too proud to admit they might have overlooked something important." Outside, Karen was arguing with an electrician while Robert made increasingly agitated phone calls. The professional veneer of their operation was starting to crack. The real masterpiece was phase 3, the drainage system. The market's success depended on creating an attractive, clean environment for customers. But the combination of fish cleaning stations, food vendors, and heavy foot traffic produces a significant amount of wastewater and organic debris. All of that had to go somewhere, and the somewhere they'd chosen was the storm drainage system that connected to the lake. It's remarkable how quickly organic waste can create drainage problems when it encounters the kind of natural obstacles that exist in any mature lakefront ecosystem. The old beaver dam, remnants I'd never bothered to clear from the drainage outlet, suddenly became much more effective at catching debris. Within days, the market's drainage system was backing up, creating standing water and unpleasant odors that no amount of cleaning could fully eliminate. "Sam, you're a genius," Martha said, reading the email complaints that had started flooding the association's inbox. "Listen to this one. The smell from the market area is making it impossible to enjoy our backyard. When will this be fixed? And this. Our property values are going to suffer if this drainage problem isn't resolved immediately." The very neighbors who'd been enjoying the community market were now demanding its removal. But Karen wasn't giving up easily. She called an emergency association meeting demanding that all property owners attend to address what she called infrastructure sabotage by a disgruntled neighbor. The meeting was held in the community center, the same room where she'd railroaded through her emergency powers resolution. But this time, the atmosphere was different. "Someone is deliberately interfering with our community market project," Karen announced to the assembled neighbors. Technical problems that started the moment certain individuals began complaining about legal, properly approved community development. Her gaze settled on me like a searchlight. This kind of selfish behavior threatens everything we're trying to build together. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Karen, I'd like to ask you a question. How much did the association pay Robert Kelly's company for this market project?" The question landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of confusion through the crowd. "That's not relevant to tonight's discussion," Karen replied quickly. "We're here to talk about infrastructure problems, not accounting details." But Martha was already standing, holding up the financial documents we'd prepared. $67,000, Martha announced clearly. $67,000 of your association dues, paid to a development company that's using our community as a testing ground for commercial real estate speculation. She began distributing copies of the financial records, the 5-year lease agreement, and the expansion plans to stunned neighbors. "Furthermore," I continued, "this market isn't temporary. According to their own planning documents, they intend to expand it to cover the entire lakefront block, turning our residential neighborhood into a commercial district. And they're doing it with your money, on property they don't own, without asking permission from the people who actually live here." The room erupted in voices, neighbors suddenly understanding that they'd been funding their own neighborhood's transformation into something they'd never agreed to. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red as she tried to regain control of the meeting, but the damage was done. When someone called for a vote of no confidence in the current board leadership, it passed unanimously. The market closed permanently 3 days later, without association funding and facing potential legal action from property owners who'd never consented to commercial development on their block. Robert Kelly's company quietly removed their equipment and disappeared. Karen resigned from the association presidency in a tersely worded email that blamed community resistance to positive change. 2 weeks after that, I was back to waking up to the sound of loons on the lake instead of diesel engines on my lawn. My workshop had returned to its peaceful purpose of small projects and quiet contemplation. The scars on my lawn would heal with time, and the insurance settlement from the association's liability policy would cover the damage to my landscaping. Martha stopped by on a Saturday morning, bringing coffee and the kind of comfortable silence that comes from shared victory. We sat on my dock, watching the lake return to its natural rhythm, unmarked by commercial ambition or community development schemes. "You know what the best part is?" Martha said eventually. "They thought they were so clever, using legal loopholes and community politics to get what they wanted. But they forgot that every system has an engineer somewhere who understands how it really works." She raised her coffee mug in a mock toast. "To the power of knowing which valves to turn." I smiled, feeling something I hadn't experienced since Margaret's death, the satisfaction of a job well done and a problem elegantly solved. They had tried to steal my property by drowning me in paperwork and community pressure, but in the end, they'd been defeated by something much simpler, the knowledge that every system, no matter how complex it appears on the surface, depends on someone who understands how to make it work. The lake was mine again, quiet and private and perfect, and I was exactly where I belonged, home.